طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We will start discussing the dynamic routing protocols, and of course we'll give some introduction about the main function of the routing protocols and what is the difference between static and dynamic and why we need dynamic and so on. So this is the level 3 or layer 3 as part of the TCP/IP stack. So the main functions of the dynamic routing protocols are to dynamically share information between routers. So this information is supposed to be used to calculate the best route from one network that's connected on one of these routers. So there is like one network connected or one or more networks connected to these routers, and our job is to try to calculate the best route that the packet will go through in order to reach the destination. And as part of this, the routers need to send some information and exchange some information between each other. So this is the first thing. Each router will then take these messages that are exchanged from the other routers, and it will update its own routing table. Okay, so based on the information that is coming from other routers, each router will analyze this information and will take part of it and will use it to update its own routing table. So the next function is that based on the routing table that exists in each router, we calculate the best path. So the routing table, and as we will see, there are some other tables that we take into consideration. Based on these collective information, based on these tables, we calculate the best path to reach from any source to any destination. Okay, so these are the main functions of any dynamic routing protocols. We will see that sharing information, for example, as part of the static routing protocols is not there. So we don't actually share information between the routers, and we don't automatically update the routing. So these two are determined manually by the person who enters the information into the table. And whatever information is in the table, we determine the best path based on what's in the table. The main functions. So the purpose of the dynamic routing protocol is to discover remote networks. And the word discover here is accurate because through exchanging the information, you have to know that first of all, you exchange information between you and the neighbor and the neighboring routers. Okay? Based on this information, first of all, you discover that there is a new router next to you. Okay, so if a router sends you information, so the first piece of information that we get is that this router is there. Okay? So we need to discover the surrounding routers, and based on that, each router will inform you that, by the way, I have these networks connected to me. So you know now that you have some networks that are remote to you, but you know that they are connected to one router which is next to you. So this information will keep accumulating through the exchange of information between all the routers. So based on that, we need to maintain up-to-date routing information, and as we know that there is some transitional period based on which the routers will keep exchanging the information, and this information will not be stable until a certain state that all routers will have information about all remote networks in the system, and any other information that gets exchanged to you by other routers will not add any more information to what you have. So if all routers reach to that state, if all routers reach to a state that any information coming from all the other routers in the system, they do not add any new information to what you already have, then we say that we have reached a stable state, okay? And in that case, all the remote networks are very well known to all routers. Before that state, there may be a transient state that routers are still exchanging information between each other, but some routers may not know all the remote networks in the system. واضحة كده؟ So some routers may not know all the remote networks in the system. Okay? So based on the up-to-date, and by up-to-date here, we don't necessarily mean stable state. Up-to-date means that you have a snapshot of the system at any point in time. Okay? Based on this snapshot of the system, you determine the best path based on the information that you have at this point in time. And then you need to figure out a way to get to know the new best path. So some routers will send you some information. Based on this information, the best path is مثلا, it contains, let's say, like 3 hubs. Then you get more information from other routers. You should be able to analyze this information and figure out that you have a better route which spans only 2 hubs instead of 3, something like that. So when you receive information from the routers, you need to analyze this information and you need to figure out that this information adds some knowledge to you based on which you need to update the table. So the main components of any routing protocol is the algorithm, and the algorithm here is the one that determines the best path. Because routing protocol messages, these are the messages that gets exchanged from all the routers together. Okay? So the routers will keep exchanging information between each other. So this router will send information to this router about the network that's currently connected to it. And this router will do the same. Will send to this router information about this network which is connected to it. So based on that, this router knows that this network will be reachable through this router. And this router will figure out that this network is reachable through this router. Okay? So each router needs to have an algorithm, and this algorithm is the component that calculates the best path based on the information that you have. Okay? So first, routing protocol messages get exchanged between the routers, and each router will analyze this information and based on which it calculates the best path and it updates the routing table. So the one that calculates the best path is the algorithm. So both components need to be there for any dynamic routing protocol. And of course, these components are not there when we talk about static routing protocol. For static routing protocol, there are no routing protocol messages, and there is no algorithm. So whatever the administrator will put in the table, this is the best path. We assume that this is the best path. Okay? Even if there is any new path or something, then we rely on the fact that the administrator will update the table. If the administrator does not update the table, then we don't know that there is a new path. So based on that the advantages of a static routing protocol compared to dynamic routing, because we know that dynamic routing, we need to exchange information automatically between the routers, and each router will detect that there is, for example, like a new path or a new remote network that's connected at this point in time, and it updates all the other routers accordingly. The static routing protocol does not use any of this. The static routing protocol relies on the fact that the administrator will manually update the table. So, is there any advantage to this? Yes, of course. There is like easy to configure. It's easy to configure because dynamic routing protocols, they need to exchange messages and they need some mechanisms to detect that there is like a new network or there is a new path or a new network got disconnected. They need to update their messages accordingly and so on and so forth. Static routing protocol does not do any of this. Static routing protocol relies completely on the administrator to figure out the state of the system. There's no extra resources needed in terms of sending messages back and forth and using an algorithm and processing and things like this. There's no such thing. It's also more secure, and why is that? Because if you have messages get exchanged between the routers, then you have the possibility that some routers might get compromised. And it's a very dangerous situation, right? Because if one of the routers is compromised, then it will not only affect its own networks, right? Because this router exchanges messages to all the other routers. So it will not only screw up the situation for itself, but it will destroy the whole network, right? Whereas if I rely on the administrator and the administrator enters everything manually, then I make sure that it's secure. Of course, assuming that the administrator enters the right information into the system. Okay, but this is definitely more secure. But of course, dynamic routing protocols, they have solutions for security. Okay, so the thing is, any router who sends routing messages, it needs to be trusted. Okay, but for static routing protocols, I don't need to make sure that the router is trusted. Why? Because the administrator is the one who enters the information in all the routing tables. In which case, even if the router is compromised, the administrator will update the entries in the table manually. So there is no chance for the routers to destroy the routing tables of each other. Meshi? But of course, the disadvantages are enormous because the network changes require manual configuration. So every time there is like a new network that enters into the system or leaves the system, or a link is down or anything, the system will not get triggered automatically in that case. The system will rely on the fact that the administrator will update the routing table. Otherwise, if there is any, like for example, if there is a remote network that gets disconnected from the system, if the administrator does not update the routing table manually to reflect that change, the routers will keep sending packets to this remote network by mistake, and all these transmissions will be wasted. معايا كده؟ So updating the routing tables manually is just a very tedious and very time-consuming job. It does not scale well for large topologies. So static routing protocols are okay if I have a small topology. If I have like 2 or 3 routers, and we keep telling our students, if you want to have an experiment of 2 or 3 routers, then it's okay to use static routing protocol. Unless you want to learn about dynamic routing protocols, but static routing protocols would do because it's very simple. You need to update only 3 routing tables for all the 3 routers, and the possible routes are 3 possible routes. because you have only 3 links. So the combinations are not that large. But imagine if you have like 10 routers or 15 routers. So for the administrator to go into each and every router and update the routing table with all the possible destination networks and all the other routers, this is a huge job, right? So that's why when the topology grows large, static routing protocols, they fall short, because you have to update huge amount of combinations of these routes, which is a very huge job. And not only that, if one link in all these routers they get disconnected or they get changed, even the bandwidth changes or something like that, then the administrator needs to figure out the impact of this change on the entire network. So the administrator needs to figure out this effect, because the effect will not be on one link only. The effect may actually reflect some changes on other routes as well. For example, if you disconnect one link, maybe there are like 10 routes that go through this link. So you need to update the routing tables of all the routers, okay, to update all the routes that pass through this link, to make sure that they use another route. Okay, معايا ولا I need to draw it just to give you. And I'm assuming that you're following the discussion. But if you need some drawing just to illustrate this, let me know. So we rely on the administrator to figure out all the changes in the network and the effect of these changes on all the routing tables of all the routers in the system, which becomes a very cumbersome process, and it becomes really not feasible, especially in large topologies. And that's why we need dynamic routing protocols, and that's why we need some automatic messages to be exchanged between the routers. And if there is any change in the system, a change is defined as like a network gets added into one router. Like you have a LAN and you connect this LAN to one of the ports in the router. This is a change in the system. Or you disconnect this network from a router. Or a router itself gets down. Or a link that connects to one of the routers gets down or gets disconnected. So all these are possible changes that happen into the system. So by default, when there is a change, the router that connects to this remote network or to this link that happens to have the change, this is the router that detects the change first. So when this router detects the change, it needs to update its messages and inform all the other routers about this change. So the change will get propagated into the system. So any change that happens, the change will get propagated into the system. So all the other routing tables and all the other routers will get updated accordingly. And we'll see طبعا many scenarios about this as we go through the discussion in this part. Any questions so far? So dynamic route. So we know from the previous slide that static routing protocols are not an option, especially in large-scale networks. Okay, so in large-scale networks, we do need to have dynamic routing protocols. So starting from here, we need to discuss the classification of this dynamic routing protocols. So dynamic routing protocols, they get divided into two major categories. Interior routing protocols, of course, the text is a little bit, but we'll discuss it in details in following slides. But I will read it. even though my eyesight is not very good, but I'll try to read it. So you have the interior gateway protocols and the exterior gateway protocols. So what happens is the dynamic routing protocols, they work on some routers in a system. Okay? But the question is there a boundary? Is there a boundary for the number of routers that get governed or controlled by the routing protocol? Or we assume that the routers in the entire internet will update each other in one flat domain? Okay? And just the fact that dynamic routing protocols, they work for large topologies, it doesn't mean that all the routers in the entire internet, they use the same routing protocol and they update each other. It's not possible, right? Because you have millions of routers. So even dynamic routing protocols, if you have millions of routers, it becomes really not controllable. So imagine the size of the routing table if we have all the routers in the entire internet in one domain. It cannot work, right? Because you need huge amount of routing tables in every routers, and it's really not possible, because when it comes to routers that belong, for example, to Ooredoo or Vodafone or something like that, then it makes sense that they are all using the same routing protocol and they exchange information with each other. But when it comes to, for example, Verizon or to AT&T or something like that, they may use other routing protocols. Okay, so it's not possible that you have all the routers in the entire internet in one domain. So that's not possible. So in which case, even dynamic routing protocols, they need to have boundaries. They need to have boundaries. Okay, so there is the concept of autonomous system. So groups of routers that belong to a certain authority, they call it autonomous system. And this group of routers, they may span from, let's say, like 4 or 5 routers all the way to maybe like 100 routers or something like that. So autonomous system is a domain of routers that use what we call interior gateway protocol. So within this autonomous system, we use what we call a interior gateway protocol. Exterior gateway protocols, they talk about the autonomous system to autonomous system routing. So these protocols, they deal with the autonomous system as a whole, as one unit. So these routing protocols, they try to deal with the autonomous system as one unit, as if it's one router. So this is like hierarchical concept or hierarchical architecture for dynamic routing protocols, because we cannot have the entire routers in the whole internet in one domain. It cannot work. So in that case, the interior routing protocols, they work within one autonomous system, and the exterior routing protocols, they are used between one autonomous system and the other. Okay? So we will discuss mainly, as part of this discussion, we will discuss mainly the interior gateway protocols. For interior gateway protocols, we have what we call distant vector protocols and link state. And this information you probably did not discuss in 455. So distant vector protocols, they exchange information and they update each other in a different way compared to link state. And we will discuss that in details later on. Okay? An example of distant vector routing protocols, just to increase كده an example of distant vector routing protocols is REP. So REP is a distant vector routing protocols. REP1 and REP2. And IGRP and EIGRP. So this needs to go here, and this needs to go here, and IGRP and EIGRP. Because REP version 2 is an extension of REP version 1, and EIGRP is an extension of IGRP. Okay? So for link state protocols, you have the OSPF is a link state protocol, and intermediate system to intermediate system routing. Those are two link state protocols. And of course here you have what we call border gateway protocol. This is an exterior routing protocol. Okay, so this is the categorization of all the routing protocols. We will discuss, as part of this course, we will discuss REP version 1, we will discuss EIGRP, and we will discuss OSPF. Okay, so mainly in this part we will discuss those three routing protocols. We will study a little bit border gateway protocol, but not in details. So again, this categorization came from the fact that you have what we call a autonomous system. Autonomous system is a group of routers under the control of a single authority. Okay? So this is like a boundary of a group of routers. All of them, they will use the same interior routing protocol. So inside one autonomous system, you can use one interior gateway protocol. In another autonomous system, you can use a different one. Actually, one or more. Inside one autonomous system, you can use one or more interior routing protocols. Okay? Which could be different from the routing protocols used in any other autonomous system. And then you have one exterior gateway protocol, like border gateway protocol, this one, that can be used to exchange information from one autonomous system to another. Okay? So, this is the details of this. So you have interior gateway protocols and exterior gateway protocols. And this illustrates the concept of autonomous system. So you have group of routers. They all form one autonomous system. And each autonomous system will have a number, an ID. Okay? So you have this is one autonomous system, and this is one autonomous system. There could be one or more of the routing protocol of the routers that belong to one autonomous system. They can apply or they can support what we call border gateway protocol. So one or more of these routers will be designated routers which can apply or use what we call border gateway protocol. So in which case, all the information from all the other routers will get aggregated here and summarized, and then it will be sent to the other autonomous system. Okay? How it's aggregated and how it's summarized, we'll talk about it later. But when the information gets exchanged between those two border gateway routers, it gets really summarized. So in each of these autonomous systems, we could use one of the interior routing interior gateway protocols. One or more of these protocols. Okay? But between those two, we use border gateway protocol. Any questions? So the interior gateway protocols, they are used for routing inside an autonomous system and used to route within the individual networks themselves, between the individual remote networks that are connected to these routers. So within one autonomous system, each router will have one or more LAN, okay, local area networks. And the interior gateway protocols, they are used to update the table of each other about how to go from one remote network to another inside this autonomous system. When it comes to an external autonomous system, we have to send all the information to one designated router, which will then use the border gateway protocol to send this information to the other autonomous system. Okay? So we have two levels. We have one autonomous system. Internally, we can use one or more interior gateway protocols, and then we have multiple autonomous systems that they exchange information through what we call border gateway protocols. Okay? So the exterior routing protocols used for routing between autonomous systems. So in that case, each autonomous system will become like a one unit, and for example, we can have one autonomous system under the control of Ooredoo. One autonomous system is under the control of AT&T, and one autonomous system under the control of Verizon, let's say. And we can just so you have one, this is autonomous system, this is Ooredoo. Let's say there's one autonomous system, this is AT&T, and another autonomous system, and this is مثلا Verizon. Okay, and these autonomous systems are connected with each other, similar to as if they are, each one of them is like a router. So again, the border gateway protocol will figure out if I want to send information from Ooredoo all the way to here. Should I go directly through here, or should I go from this autonomous system to Verizon first and then to AT&T? Similar to the interior routing protocols. But here, some information may be related to legal issues and things like that. So for example, the traffic cannot go from here to here, from legal perspective. So it has to go through the indirect link, something like that. So there are some more details and different mechanisms that the border gateway protocol has to take into consideration in order to send the information from one autonomous system to another. So as we said, for interior gateway protocols here, we need to understand the difference between distance vector protocols and link state. As we talked about 1 minute ago about the categorization of interior gateway protocols, we said that we have distance vector protocols and we have link state. Okay? So what is the difference and what is the comparison between the two? Well, for distance vector protocols, first of all, routes are advertised as vectors. What does that mean? What happens is that for distance vector routing protocols, each router will get the information from the neighboring routers only. Okay? So each router will get information from the neighboring routers only, and will get it in a form of distance vector. Distance vector. This router informs R2 that I have some local area networks connected to me. Okay? And the distance between me and these LANs is X, like 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that. Okay? And router 4 will do the same, and router 3 will do the same. So R2 will get 3 distant vectors from 3 routers, and it needs to analyze this distance vector, and based on which it needs to figure out that, okay, R1 has a distance to one remote network which is better than the one that I have. So in that case, I will update my routing table with the distance that I received from R1 because it seems better. So this is what we call distance vector. So in distance vector, I always receive vector of distances to all the possible remote networks which are connected to R1. So initially you have to know that each router will have partial information. Okay? Through the exchange of messages, this partial information grows with time until I know the distance between me and all the possible remote networks in the autonomous system. But it needs to grow gradually. It needs to grow gradually. So each router will form a message which has a distance vector to all the remote networks that are connected to it. And it will send it to route 1. Route 1 will say, okay, I will update my routing table accordingly. And then router 2 will then send the distances inside its own routing table to all the other routers. Because these routers might again figure out that the distance that router 2 provides to one of the remote networks is better than the one that they have. So they update the routing tables accordingly. And they keep exchanging what we call a distance vector. And always, the distance vector, they get exchanged from the neighboring routers.
Based on what they choose the best path, based on the distance?
Based on the distance.
In this case, they're equal distance?
No. What happens here is that the remote networks are not in this picture. The remote networks are not in this. So let's say. So for example, router 1 has a remote network, network 1 and network 2. Router 3 has network 3 and network 4. And this has network 5, network 6, and this one will have network 7. So these are networks that are connected on the ports of these routers. And when I say network 1 and network 2, this means that this router can connect to these networks directly. Which means that the distance between this router and this network is 0. There's no, they are directly connected LANs. You following? So these are directly connected LANs. So each one of these is directly connected LANs. So in that case, router 1 will send a distance vector that is N1 and the distance is 0, N2 and the distance is 0. And will form one message with this vector of distances, and it will send it to R2. R2, when it receives this, it checks its own table. I don't have any distances for network 1 and network 2, which means that what I get is better than what I have. Because the default is that I have infinite distance to these networks, which means I cannot connect to them. So in that case, router 2 will increment these zeros by 1. Why? Because it says that in order to reach these networks, I need to reach them through router 1. Okay? So router 2 will say, okay, so it will update its routing table based on that. So router 2 has network 7 with distance A 0, because it's directly connected. And then it will add N1 with distance 1 through router 1. And N2 with distance 1 through router 1. So this becomes the new routing table of router 2. Router 2 will do the same from router 3, which will send a message N4 with distance 0, N3 with distance 0. So this router 2, so this is router A. So this is router 3, and this is router 1. And this is router 2. When router 2 receives the message from router 3, it will update N3. It will update the routing table N3 with distance 1 from A, R3. And N4 with distance 1 from R3. This is how it happens. Later on, router 2 will send this entire table as one distance vector to all the other routers that are connected to it. And again, when router 3 receives message from router 2, it will figure out that it can reach N1 and N2, right, with a distance of A 2, bravo عليك, 2. And through what? R2, bravo عليك. So this way the information will get propagated into this. But always I receive some vectors of distances between me and the neighboring routers only. So that's how the distance vector works. Okay? Is there any possible way? Yes. Link state works in a different way completely. Link state, the way it works is that each router needs to know the state of all the links in the autonomous system. So I don't receive a message with distances. I receive a state about a link. And this state about the link, it gets forwarded from one router to another. So for example, so this router connects to another router, and this router connects to another router, and so on. So this router will send the state of these links to this router. And this router, it will not calculate distances. No, it will forward these link states to this router. And this router will aggregate all the link states, and then it will send it to this router. And then there is no routing table which calculates the distances. No, there is link state table. There is a link state table. So each router will maintain a table of all the links and the state of each link. So I don't receive distances from neighboring routers. No, I need to receive states about the links from all the routers in the entire network. Okay, كده? And based on the link state table, there is the algorithm will parse this table, and it will tell me that in order to reach a remote network, you need to go through this link and this link and this link and this link. So those are two different mechanisms. One works based on the distances, and the distances, they get accumulated. Okay? So you have to imagine that in order for me to get a route which is like 10 hops away from me, I have to get it gradually. Because these updates, they come every now and then. Okay? But for the case of linked state, it's usually faster. ليه؟ لأن these linked states, they get propagated into the system initially from, starting from time 0, they get propagated into the system very quickly. So each router, in order to reach steady state, it needs to get the information about all the possible links in the network. And then the algorithm will calculate the end-to-end route based on the states of these links in the link state table. Okay? So these are this is the difference in the concept between distance vector and link state. And we'll discuss this further next time, and then we will discuss the difference between the two mechanisms. Because this is really fundamental to what we will discuss afterwards. It's really important. Okay?